The night Adrian Vale came home early, the mansion should have been silent. Adrian Vale, a self-made millionaire known for ruthless precision and control, stepped through the gates 2 weeks ahead of schedule. His overseas deal had collapsed unexpectedly, and he decided not to inform anyone of his return. No assistance. No security alerts. He wanted peace, not questions. But as his car rolled to a stop, something felt wrong. Lights glowed in the east wing, a part of the house that was always shut down when he traveled. Adrian dismissed the unease and entered through the staff corridor, the polished floors echoing softly beneath his shoes. He was halfway down the hallway when a voice stopped him cold. "Sir, please. Don't move." It was barely a whisper, trembling, urgent. Adrian froze. Standing near the laundry room was his maid, a black woman in her early 30s named Naomi. She had worked for him for years. Calm. Professional. Loyal. But now her hands shook, her eyes wide with fear. "Naomi?" Adrian said quietly. "Why are you still here?" She rushed toward him and stopped inches away, lowering her voice even further. "You weren't supposed to come back tonight." The words hit harder than they should have. "What do you mean I wasn't supposed to be back?" Adrian asked. Naomi swallowed, her throat moving visibly. "Please, stay quiet. There are people upstairs." Adrian's jaw tightened. "This is my house." Naomi shook her head fast, panic rising in her expression. "Not tonight." Footsteps sounded above them. Heavy. Deliberate. More than one person. Adrian felt the shift instantly, the kind of awareness that had saved him in hostile negotiations and silent power plays. Naomi wasn't acting. She wasn't confused. She was scared. "Who's upstairs?" he whispered. She hesitated, then spoke so softly he almost didn't hear it. "Your family." Adrian stiffened. "I don't have family." Naomi's eyes glistened. "They said you approved everything. Meetings. Locked rooms. They said if I told anyone, I wouldn't make it out of this house alive." Anger surged through him. He took a step toward the staircase, but Naomi grabbed his sleeve. "Please don't," she begged. "They're not who you think." He pulled free slowly. "Explain." Her voice broke. "One of them looks exactly like you." The footsteps upstairs stopped. Silence pressed down, thick and watching. Adrian felt his pulse hammer in his ears as he climbed the stairs, each step measured. Naomi followed at a distance, fear etched into every movement. The hallway lights flickered as they reached the study. The door was open. Inside, 5 people sat around Adrian's private conference table. Papers were spread out everywhere, company contracts, bank statements, architectural plans of his headquarters. His chair stood at the head of the table. And in it sat a man with Adrian's face. Same jawline. Same scar above the eyebrow. Same eyes. The man looked up and smiled. "You're early," he said. Adrian's breath caught. "Who are you?" The man stood and straightened his jacket. "You really don't recognize your brother?" Adrian's fists clenched. "Lucas is dead." The man laughed softly. "That's what we needed you to believe." The others avoided Adrian's gaze. One woman folded a document too quickly. Another man shut a laptop with nervous speed. Lucas stepped closer, studying Adrian like a reflection. "You built an empire," he said calmly. "And now we're taking it back." "Get out of my house," Adrian said. Lucas smiled wider. "You can't call security. They work for us now. Your board already voted. Your accounts are being drained as we speak." Adrian glanced back at Naomi. Tears streamed silently down her face. Lucas followed his gaze. "She's been cooperative. Fear is a powerful motivator." Adrian's voice dropped. "You threatened her." Lucas shrugged. "Necessary." Adrian looked at the documents again. This wasn't a break-in. It was a hostile takeover planned to perfection. Lucas leaned in, voice low. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "Fight this, and people die." Adrian smiled slowly. "You made one mistake," he said. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Which is? You assumed I came home alone. From the hallway came the quiet sound of a door unlocking. Naomi wiped her tears and whispered, "They're here." The door at the end of the hallway opened slowly, not with panic or force, but with purpose, the kind of purpose that came from preparation rather than impulse. The hinges made a low, controlled sound, and then the footsteps followed, measured, heavy, disciplined. These were not the steps of people rushing into danger. These were the steps of people who had already calculated the outcome. Lucas turned sharply, his confident posture tightening, his shoulders stiffening as reality finally reached him. Adrian, by contrast, remained perfectly still, his face unreadable, his breathing slow and steady, as if this moment had been waiting for him rather than surprising him. 3 men entered the study first. They wore plain clothes, dark jackets, neutral colors, nothing that identified rank or affiliation, but the way they moved made it clear they didn't need uniforms. Their eyes worked like instruments, sweeping the room in synchronized patterns, clocking exits, distances, body language, and threats within seconds. Each one positioned himself subtly, cutting off paths without making it obvious. Behind them came a woman holding a tablet, her expression focused, detached. Her fingers moved rapidly across the screen, activating cameras, syncing recordings, scanning documents, cataloging every paper spread across the table as if the room itself were confessing. Lucas let out a short laugh, forced and brittle. "You think this changes anything?" he said, though his voice lacked the ease it had moments earlier. "You're already too late." Adrian finally spoke, his voice calm, controlled, and dangerously certain. "It changes everything." One of the men stepped forward just enough to command the room without raising his voice. "This property is now under private security lockdown. No one leaves until authorities arrive. Any attempt to interfere will be documented and treated accordingly." The woman with the tablet looked up, her gaze steady and professional. "We have video evidence spanning 14 days. Audio recordings of meetings, threats, and financial discussions. Transaction trails showing attempted asset transfers. Facial recognition confirmation tying every individual in this room to the conspiracy. It's more than enough to dismantle this entire operation." Lucas's eyes snapped toward Naomi. She stood near the doorway, her posture different now, her spine straight, her hands no longer shaking. The fear that had weighed her down for weeks had lifted, replaced by something stronger, resolve. When she spoke, her voice was clear and firm, carrying across the room without effort. "I recorded every meeting. Every threat. Every time you used his name like it belonged to you. Every plan you made assuming I was invisible." Lucas stared at her, disbelief spreading across his face. "You told me you had nothing," he said, his voice rising. Naomi met his gaze without flinching. "I said you wouldn't get it." Adrian turned toward her slowly, seeing her not as staff, not as someone in his employ, but as someone who had stood alone in the dark and chosen courage anyway. "You risked everything," he said quietly. Naomi nodded once. "Because silence was what they were counting on. And I refused to give them that." Outside, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, threading through the massive halls of the mansion like a final warning. Red and blue lights flashed faintly through the tall windows, washing the walls in shifting colors, casting long, restless shadows across the room. The world beyond the gates was closing in. Lucas took an unsteady step back, panic finally breaking through the cracks of his arrogance. "I'm your brother," he said, turning to Adrian, desperation edging his voice. "You wouldn't let them do this to me. Not after everything." Adrian stepped closer, stopping just inches away. His expression was calm, but his eyes were unyielding. "You stopped being my brother the moment you threatened the people who trusted me," he said. "The moment you chose control over loyalty." The men moved in smoothly, restraining Lucas and the others with practiced efficiency. There was no struggle, only the sound of cuffs clicking into place and sharp breaths of realization. The documents on the table were gathered and sealed into evidence bags. Laptops were shut down, tagged, and removed. Carefully drawn plans, once meant to dismantle an empire, were reduced to proof of betrayal. As Lucas was escorted toward the door, he twisted his head back one last time, his voice sharp with fury and fear. "This isn't over." Adrian didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because it already was. The house didn't return to silence immediately after they were taken away. It breathed first. Low voices echoed down the corridors as officers moved through rooms that had once held only wealth and routine. Doors opened and closed. Evidence was labeled. Statements were recorded. Adrian stood near the study window, watching the lights outside paint the night in red and blue, thinking about how close everything had come to disappearing without a sound. Naomi sat across from him, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had given her. For the first time since he'd known her, she wasn't standing at attention or waiting for instruction. She looked exhausted, but there was a calm in her eyes that hadn't been there before, the calm of someone who had finally told the truth after carrying it alone for too long. "You could have left," Adrian said quietly. "No one would have blamed you." Naomi shook her head slowly. "That's what they expected. That I'd leave, or stay silent, or pretend I didn't see what was happening. People like them always expect that." Adrian nodded, the weight of her words settling in. "They almost won because of that assumption." "Almost," Naomi replied. "But not this time." By morning, the mansion felt different. Lighter, but not untouched. News had already begun to spread. A powerful executive exposed. A secret brother revealed. A corporate takeover stopped from the inside. Reporters gathered at the gates, speculating, guessing, filling the gaps with theories that didn't quite reach the truth. The truth was quieter. It was a black maid who refused to stay quiet when silence was safer. It was a man who learned too late that power means nothing without loyalty. And it was a family name that finally lost its grip. Weeks later, the fallout was complete. Charges were filed. Accounts frozen. Board members replaced. The empire Adrian had built survived, but it was reshaped. Policies changed. Security restructured. Trust reevaluated. The lesson was clear: threats don't always come from the outside. Sometimes they look exactly like you. Naomi no longer wore a maid's uniform. Her role in the company had changed permanently, not as a reward, but as recognition. Her insight, her awareness, her refusal to look away had saved more than one life that night. On her first day in her new office, she paused at the doorway and looked back at Adrian. "Funny how staying quiet was supposed to protect me." Adrian gave a small smile. "And speaking up changed everything." That night, Adrian walked through his home alone. The lights were off where they should be. The halls were empty. Peace had returned, but it wasn't the kind that comes from ignorance. It was the kind earned through confrontation. He stopped in the study, the place where it had almost all ended, and realized something unsettling. If he hadn't come home early, if Naomi hadn't whispered those words, if fear had won just once, none of this would have been exposed. The scariest part wasn't the betrayal. It was how easily it could have succeeded. So the question lingers long after the doors close and the sirens fade. How many truths stay buried because someone chose silence? How many takeovers happen quietly, not through force, but through fear? And if you were in Naomi's place, would you have spoken up? Make sure to like, share and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this.